Hi everyone, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here to speak in front of you guys. Altu, thanks for inviting me. I'm going to be giving a slightly different topic than what may have been presented here in the past. So bear with me. I'd like to have more of a, I guess, a discussion, if you will. So first, let me make sure, I might not be talking to the right audience, so let me kind of gauge what the audience is. How many of you guys work at companies that are larger than 50 employees? Okay. How many work at companies that are less than 10 employees? 2. How many want to do startups? All right, so not a bad audience then. That's good, because I think fundamentally what it is when you do development in a startup, it's slightly different than when you're doing development in a large enterprise. All of the methodologies you apply are similar. What you're working with is a lot less. So the question is, how do you make that work? So I like to title my presentation, How to Manage Software Development in a Bootstrap Startup, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Entrepreneurship. Because when you're doing development in a startup, when you're doing entrepreneurship, it is a huge headache. You have to worry about a lot of things, but you learn to live with it, you learn to deal with it. So let me give quickly my background. So we are still in the alpha phase for our startup. So we haven't even given the startup a name yet. It's just codenamed Project Polarity for now. I'm working with 2 other co-founders. They're Turkish. I'm American, Chinese American. What we're developing is a SaaS business management solution for small, medium enterprises in Turkey. My background, if you see, it's mostly in finance, and I actually studied economics. So I may not even be qualified to be talking to you guys, but I'll try to do my best. And what I mean by that is I really believe that anyone can do entrepreneurship. I believe that anyone can code. What you have to be is you have to be resourceful, you have to be scrappy. You have to be very persistent. So, you know, if for any of you guys that are not coders in the audience, not being a coder by background should definitely not be a discouragement. Guys I'm working with, one is a designer, Fari. The other guy is a programmer, developer, on Dutch. So what you see in the team is very, very important. Because to do a startup team, you need a very well-rounded team, I believe. So what we try to do here from the business aspect is one person is business and finance, that's me. One person is sort of the product guy, so he's managing the UI, UX, that's Fari. And the other guy is sort of the CTO role, dictating what kind of technology we should be using, what kind of platforms we should be developing on, and that's on Dutch. So keep in mind when you are looking for co-founders in the startups, while it's nice to work with friends or work with people of like-mindedness, it's, I think, better to have sort of a diverse background of experience. So, and what I mean by the difference in development in the startup versus the enterprise is, in a startup, everything is limited. Everything. And I think in Turkey specifically, what I'm seeing is that there's a vibrant startup culture. A lot of really interesting things, really exciting things are going on. But the market is just developing. So from a financing perspective, that's still very, very small. So a lot of the startups out there, you may not be able to get financing. When you don't get financing, the best you can do is either go off your savings, or more likely you're going to be moonlighting. So first, I would like to talk about limited funding. How do you work on a project if you can only spend, let's say, $100 a month on it? For those guys that are working in large enterprises, that's definitely not the monthly budget you guys have. But how do you make that work? How do you stretch that? Second, because people are moonlighting or part-timing, there's a lot of kind of lean, agile processes that might not work. You may not be able to do the sprints that you guys are used to in large enterprises. And in fact, one person is working, the other person is working full-time. Communication may not be that good. You have to wait for someone to return for their full-time job to get in touch with them. Meetings may have to happen on the weekends. Turnaround is not as fast as what you would like. So how do you still kind of sprint, but sort of at a different pace than what you might be used to. And then, of course, the almighty question in a startup is certainty. Startup, by nature, is very, very uncertain. Not only from a business perspective are you uncertain of your cash flow, from a product perspective, you're still working on finding the market fit. So how do you develop given that challenge? And it's sort of like in the Pragmatic Programmer, if you guys have read that book, it's sort of like finding a target in the dark, shooting in the dark. You're trying to find a target, and the target itself is moving, and you're doing this in the dark. So how do you actually achieve that? So let's talk about limited funding first. And this talk of mine is going to be very, I guess, practical. Sorry, this is, you guys have probably seen this picture before, right? This is basically what I'm living with right now. I'm begging out there for financing. This is what I have to deal with, right? So if you kind of look at everything we're doing, iPlots is what we're using for wireframing. I'm paying $0 for that. Twitter Bootstrap is what we use to do the initial prototyping. Open source, $0. Rails, you guys, I guess first I should ask too, how many people work with Ruby, with Rails, with Python, these kind of technologies? Oh, Engin, good to see you in there. So not many people are working with these technologies. How many people are working with .NET right now, ASP? What other languages are you guys, or technologies are you guys using? Java? Java, there's Ruby. Anyone else? But you guys are kind of used to the Rails framework and the mindset. Okay. So we're using Rails for backend, that's 0. We're using Embers.js, which is the new JavaScript framework I'll talk about a little bit. That's $0. Google Apps, we're paying for the domain, which is like $10 a year, but other than that, Google Apps is 0. Sublime we're using as our text editor, 0. FreeMind we're using sort of for brainstorming, I'll demo that in a little bit, that's 0. LaunchRock we're using for some preliminary kind of Google SEM marketing kind of tactics. That is $0 as well. What we end up paying for is our private repository on GitHub. How many people use GitHub or Git? Okay. We're paying for Heroku, so we have a couple dynos there to do our deployment. So what we end up paying for is something that's, I don't know, it's probably only around 50, but let's say it's definitely less than $100 a month. So this is what I'm working with, and actually there's a lot of technologies out there. You can really stretch your money. It's really, really easy nowadays. So Ruby on Rails, while we're using it, you guys are used to kind of the Ruby framework, the MVC framework. The reasons why we're picking it, especially, maybe not particularly in Turkey, but worldwide there's a huge community, which means that if there's any question that pops up, it's really easy to just go online, Google for it, go to Stack Overflow, look up the question. I did a check last night, there's over 100,000 questions tagged as Ruby on Rails on Stack Overflow. There's not a single question that I haven't found on Stack Overflow. So that is a very, very good resource. And there's a lot of online free resources, rubyonrails.org, Railscast, Code School, you name it, it's probably there. What I really like about it is the idea of being able to create sort of a consistent environment for a distributed team. And what I mean by that is, again, think back to the fact that you and your co-founders may not be working in the same office, maybe working at different hours of the day. How do you coordinate all of that? Well, with the Rails framework, there's a lot of easy ways. I'll give 2 examples. One is the DB migrate. So migration to database. So you set up a database, you make changes. The old school fashion may be that you mail these changes to all your developers, your team, so that they make changes on their local machine. But with Rails, and if it's set up on GitHub and so on, you just run a script. You use metaprogramming to make the changes to the database. So you can make changes, you can roll back changes, all of that is very, very easy to do. Gemfile is basically a way to create sort of a consistent environment again. So you can create a different environment for your test environment, for your developer environment, for your deployment and staging environment. All of that makes it really, really easy to work with distributed teams. So just to give you an idea, this is, again, a very practical guide. These are some of the gems we're using. This is just the basic assets. PGs for Postgres. We use the device gem for user authentication. Active model serializer and multi-JSON we use for basically our communication to our front end. I'll talk a little bit more about our front end architecture in a bit. HAML is, I think you guys know, it's just simplified HTML. Ember is the Ember.js framework I was talking about. jQuery, client-side validations, internationalization. We use Sass, we use CoffeeScript, and Uglifier for JavaScript minification. All this stuff is free. For our test environment, we focus a lot on testing. I'll talk more about testing in a bit. Again, we use QUnit for the JavaScript testing. We use RSpec for the Ruby testing. We set up Guard so that testing is automatic. And again, you guys feel free to kind of sketch this down. I'll try to upload the, presentation to the website so you guys have the list of gem files. But basically, the point is all this stuff is free. You don't have to develop it yourself. The community has done it for you, so it makes your job a lot easier. Development environment, these are our gems. And then the product and staging environment, these are our gems. So on the Rails side, or on the back-end side, we used the open source MVC framework. It was really, really effective. We started developing using Rails. One of the challenges we had was thinking about the Turkish environment, the fact that there may not be so many Ruby on Rails programmers. But I guess ultimately our philosophy was that really good programmers like to test a lot of technologies, and since we're focused on really good programmers anyway, they probably have some kind of familiarity with Rails, and if not, they're willing to learn and pick it up. And having that kind of philosophy in mind, we did run into a bit of trouble on the front end. When we started developing Rails, we didn't really focus too much on the front end side. So what that means is, given kind of where SaaS architecture is, given where the technology is, users are expecting a lot of interaction with the program. In fact, the program should behave almost like a native application. That's how much interaction users are expecting nowadays. We just started programming using jQuery, and it quickly got really, really messy. It was very, very ugly. We knew that that was not going to be scalable. There was going to be a huge problem. So we looked around. We looked at Backbone. We looked at Angular. I'm not sure if you guys know Angular. How many of you guys know Ember or have tried to test? So we ultimately went with Ember. It's a really heated debate out there, which is better. And I think from sort of a pure sort of computer science perspective, maybe Angular is actually better. A lot of people are kind of voting for that. The reason why we went with Ember, again, is sort of the community, because a lot of startups out there are already using Ember. So maybe this is a bad philosophy, but I figured if companies like Square, what are the others? Zendesk, Living Social, Discourse, Yak, Groupon, if they're using Ember, there must be a reason that they're more likely to kind of stimulate the community. Whereas if you look at Angular, the projects that are being developed there are mostly internal Google projects or sort of like classroom-based projects. So that's where we're putting the bet on. So anyway, Ember.js is an MVC framework for the front end. It's got the model, it's got the view, it's got the controllers, it's got the router. It's very, very new. Last time I checked, it's in release candidate 3, which means that we did have a lot of problems moving with it as different versions came out. But it's open source. It's championed by Yehuda Katz, which you guys know is from the Rails core team. So we made the switch from jQuery to Ember kind of midway through our alpha release. And it was a challenge. We had to scrap a lot of our old code. But basically what we learned from there is, as developers, your philosophy should be to always keep abreast of new technology, to know what's going on out there. That doesn't mean, to jump on every new technology that comes out, but it's always good to, pick up a different framework, pick up a different language every half a year or a year or so you know what's going on. Evaluate that appropriately, strike the right balance between using new technologies and just having to jump on the bandwagon. And then what it means with your legacy code is that, again, testing is super, super important. So how many of you guys write your own tests? Engen, you don't write your tests? Okay, there's one hand. Sorry, I used to work with Engen in my the past startup I worked at. So not a whole lot of you are testing out there. Is that right? Why aren't you guys testing? Because someone else is doing it, or because it's just not part of your workflow right now? Well, let me, for those of you guys that are not testing, I'll make some arguments to why you should be all writing tests. So basically I covered how to develop a startup, how to use technologies, and how to do all of that within less than $100 budget. So let me talk a little bit about coordination. Our team right now, I'm full-time, but the rest of my two co-founders are part-time. I work with one guy 2 days a week, sort of a co-working session, because he's more of a freelancer. He has the time to spare. But the other guy's working full-time, and so we have to coordinate at nights. And on the weekends, we have meetings. But what that means is I'll do part of the job, but I need to wait for someone else to do his part of the job so I can turn that around. And that, you can imagine, is a very, very hard way to sprint. And the startup is all about sprinting. So one of our major challenges is trying to figure out how to overcome that. So I kind of made sort of an oxymoronic statement, and I sort of said that it's two things. One is discipline, the other one's being lazy. Discipline, you guys can imagine why that would be important. And laziness is sort of this idea, this Bill Gates quote, that if there's a way you can sort of engineer a solution to take advantage of technology out there to do all this kind of stuff, then you should use it. So we try to look for as many productivity tools as possible to help us overcome this limitation in coordination. So what is discipline? Well, it's basically being able to do things consistently so you're always producing a expected result. So it's establishing a rhythm so you never sort of miss a beat. And when your teams are distributed, working at different times, it's really, really important to establish that rhythm. And you can think about it from sort of the agile perspective, assigning points to a storyboard, having a velocity calculated. And we're just thinking about it more sort of, basically. So how do we establish that discipline? First, we have to establish a clear responsibility for our teams. In a startup, everyone is expected to touch everything. We're likewise the same case. So all of us are JavaScript programmers, we're Rails programmers, we're also doing the CSS, HTML. And when we try to argue, well, which way is it? How should we organize our responsibilities? One argument is we can organize it based on kind of the modular, the part of the platform that you're developing. So let's say Fari, he can work on the dashboard. He can do the design, the front-end programming, the back-end programming. And in that case, he doesn't need to wait for any of us. He can do all that himself. Then I can, meanwhile, work on the newsfeed part of the platform. And then Andosh can work on the invoicing part of the platform. And we don't have to wait for anyone. We just do it and then plug it all in. That was one argument. The other argument is basically based on functionality. So Andosh will concentrate on the back end, I'll concentrate on the front end, and Fari will concentrate on the design, the UI, UX. We ended up going for the latter because we believe that specialization is better than the former approach. And what we do is, given these responsibilities, it's very, very clear who's working on what, and you basically hold them accountable to it. Pretty practical common sense. The way we establish a rhythm is We have weekly meetings, we have co-working sessions, we do regular reviews. Everything that you do in a large enterprise, you should not skimp out on just because you're a startup. So we established this, we do this regularly, you never miss it. So everyone expects that on a Saturday you have a meeting, no one's gonna be missing it. We also stagger our workflow so that to get around this idea of working at different times. So Ondutch works on the back end first. He fleshes that out, then passes the job to me, so I work on the front end. I get that done, and then I pass the job to Fari so he can polish the design, the UX. And then on the weekends we meet together to kind of discuss our progress for the week. We try to establish very disciplined meetings. There's what do you call it? Monogram, not monogram, what do you call them? Anyway, there's a thing called SMOSA out there, which is, it stands for you start and stop your meetings promptly. We start at 1 o'clock, we promptly stop at 3 o'clock. Everyone knows that, so you know exactly when to get there, when to end it. We create our agenda in advance. We record minutes. That's really, really, really important. A lot of meetings happen, no one's bothering to write it down. Everyone forgets what everyone else talked about, and then later it's basically sort of a useless meeting. So we record it, we put it on Google Docs so everyone knows, everyone can see it and reference it later. One speaker at a time, so no one's shouting over each other. We send materials in advance. We have action items at the beginning of the meeting. So we have a 3-pass policy. What we found out is a lot of the times, because we're so kind of invested in the project, that we wanted to get it perfect all the time. And what we ended up doing was spending a disproportionate amount of time on one part of the platform while the rest of the platform was not being developed. So we instituted this 3-pass policy, which says anything you want to develop, you present it to the team during one meeting. The team agrees on the basic features of it. Then we develop it, we present it again, which with the prototype. The team finalizes what's needed, and then during the third meeting, we present kind of the draft. And at that point, there's no more objections. Any objections that you should have raised it during the 3 meetings. Anything later than that will be dismissed. So we try to do this just to be more efficient. And then, like I said, our meetings are every Saturday. It's always at the same time, always at the same location. So there's an expectation that's met. Now, we try to use as many productivity tools as we can. And I've never worked at a big company. I'm not sure what kind of tools you guys are using at large enterprises. I'm sure there's a lot. I just like to kind of point out at some of the tools that a lot of startups are using. Github using the Git flow kind of structure is kind of really popular out there. How many of you guys know about Git flow? Okay, not too many, so I'll go into a little bit of detail and explain that. We use SourceTree because all of us use Macs. SourceTree is sort of an easy application produced by Atlassian to manage your GitHub and your Git flow work process. We use Google Apps because it's actually really easy to share everything there. We structured everything based on development, business processes, meeting minutes, and so on. So it's just easier than kind of sending Excel files, sending Word documents back and forth. Other tools that we use Asana, Yammer. We took a look at Pivotal Tracker and a bunch of Atlassian products, which you guys should do as well. The reason we use these tools, one is, again, we're distributed, so we need sort of a central repository to keep our work. 2 is, because we have coordination problems, we need a way to efficiently communicate, efficiently keep each other up to date. And then 3rd is the communication problem. So Git. Git is version control. It's like the 4th generation of some version control. I don't know the exact history, but you guys should look it up. It's really, really fascinating. It allows multiple developers to work on any code at the same time. The way it works is We use GitHub as the remote repository. That's where sort of a central version of the code is stored. Anytime a developer wants to use it, you basically pull a version from the repository. You work on your local machine. After you make the changes, you add the changes, staging the changes, you commit the changes, and then you push the code back to the repository. Any conflicts that happen, because maybe Fari and me are working on the same piece of code, Git has a process, an algorithm to sort of merge the changes. Now, that's not quite enough to structure this entire thing, so we follow Git flow to structure our work process. So what is that? Well, Git flow breaks up it breaks up sort of the work process into features, into development, into release, into hotfix, and into the master branch. The master branch is something that you rarely touch. That's the deployment version. Anytime you want to work on something, you're working on it on a feature branch. Once you finish a feature, you push it, you merge it into the development branch. Anytime you want to release something, you push the development version into the release branch, and that's sort of like the staging area where things sit for a while, you test a little bit. Anytime you have bugs on the release branch, you do a hotfix on it. And then when you're ready to deploy it, you push it onto the master branch. We deploy it via Heroku. And we use this application called Source Tree to manage all of that. Do you guys have any questions so far on any of this? Okay, so I'll just go ahead and plow along then. Source Tree, let me just do a quick demonstration of Source Tree here. So you see that this is my local machine. These are the issues that I've opened. These are basically all the features that I'm using, that I'm developing. Here's a branch that I'm working on. I'm adding a bunch of tests. So I work on this. I make some changes. These are uncommitted changes. When I'm ready to commit the changes, I add the changes, and then I commit it. And once I commit it, I can push it to the develop branch. So again, going back to this process, basically, if I can see this right, here's the features that I'm working on. Once I'm ready, I push it over to develop. And imagine this is just done on my local machine. So for me to be able to coordinate with my teammates, I need to also push my local machine changes onto the central repository hosted at GitHub. GitHub we're using for task assignment. It's really easy. Instead of using a third tool like Pivotal Tracker or any of the Atlassian bug tracking products, we basically do everything via GitHub. So we open issues, we assign a person to it, we put a label to the issue. So the label could be a feature, it could be in progress, it could be an enhancement, it could be a bug, or it could be under review. And once it's under review and the team agrees on it, then we close the feature. We try to group the features along milestones. So a milestone is basically our next release. This way, it lets us track what percentage is being finished. There's a lot of different features on GitHub that you can use to sort of manage your development. Efficient communication. It's really important for distributed teams. And the way I think about communications, I like to break it down to sort of 3 categories. There's two-way communication. Basically, you're talking to me over phone or over email. It's really good for kind of a direct response where we need collaboration. One-way communication is basically for task assignment. Sometimes it's not necessary to kind of it's not efficient to email each other what tasks there are, so therefore we're using GitHub for development assignments, and then we're using Asana for non-development related. So, sorry, it should be business related here, for business related assignments. And there's one thing that I found actually really useful, which is something that people may not be using out there. It's sort of broadcast communication. Anytime you sort of have a good article, you might be emailing your development team. Sometimes it's easier to just use something like Facebook or Twitter, but set it up privately. We're using Yammer. Anytime we see something interesting, whether it's business related or development related, we just post it onto our Yammer account so the entire organization knows what's going on. So the third part of trying to manage development in a startup is this idea that certainty is not very, very well defined. Startups are by nature uncertain. And the fact that you have to bootstrap this entire operation, again, moving in the dark, it makes it even more uncertain. So that's, I'm not going to talk a lot about kind of agile lean methodology. I'm not an expert. You guys are probably more experts there than me. One thing that, one quote that I really liked is in the Pragmatic Programmer, where Dave Thomas suggests using tracer bullets. So what he meant by that is you have a target, it's somewhere in the dark, you can't see it very well, so what you could do is you could fire a bullet that sort of shines a light towards the target. So, the target may be 10 meters to the right and you shoot the bullet, it kind of goes over there and you kind of see what's around. That is sort of a good methodology to use. You build something, build it really quick, push it out there, talk to customers, and see if what you're building is correct for the customer. Another way I like to think about it, I like drawing, so I like to describe it sort of coding the Marvel way. So when you're actually drawing, what you do is you sketch out something. You don't build the entire thing. You don't build it out in depth. You do it layer by layer. So our approach, first we do the market research. We establish the business case for what we're building. We prioritize the features. We build the skeleton features first. The skeleton features is enough of a product for customers to interact with it, to get feedback on it, and then we start fleshing out the secondary features. One thing you have to be careful with is know when to stop. Just as within drawing, if you're adding too many strokes, you might be ruining the painting. A lot of products out there have way too many features. There sort of is if you build 90% of the features that customers need, maybe it's enough. You don't have to touch on all the edge cases. What we use is, for our wireframing, we use iPlots. It's free. You can build a wireframe really, really quickly. It's hosted online, so you can interact with any of your beta users. You can interact with the team. Team members can contribute very easily, so it's really good for distributed programming. Second, what we did was we just used Twitter Bootstrap to quickly kind of build the product, so we don't have to focus too much on the design. The design's already there for you. This was basically our sort of our page to show all the invoices, because we're doing a business management solution. So we wireframed it, we built it into Twitter Bootstrap, let our beta users interact with it, and then we flesh out the design to make it more presentable, to add more features to it. Given all that uncertainty, what you'll definitely be certain of is that a lot of your code will be changing all the time. Features will change. You'll need to refactor your code on a regular basis. And you may be adding new technologies and so on, so there may be a lot of legacy code out there. So how can you be comfortable working with legacy code? At my old startup, what we did was, I guess we didn't build a lot of testing. So what we did was we actually had a QA tester poking around manually on the platform. So that's obviously not a very efficient way. So what we're trying to do at this startup is we want to do test-driven development. We want to practice it religiously. And you guys know test-driven development. It's you write the test code first before you actually write the program. Before you actually code write real code. So you write all the tests, and you write enough code to make the test pass. And to be able to control your testing path, you use stubs and mocks. What we use a combination of unit, functional, and integration tests. Sorry. Back on? Okay. So we use a lot of unit testing for the Rails side, along with functional testing, but on the Ember.js side, because of the way Ember.js is structured, it's very, very complex. It's really hard to write unit and functional tests. We have to do a lot of integration tests. Unit tests, to cover it, it's basically testing one methodology or one method or one class. It's very surgical. You can precisely test different parts of the code. Functional test is basically testing a bunch of different functions that may interact with each other. And the integration test is really good for testing views. So it's almost like testing how users would interact with the program itself. You're doing a system-wide test there. For the Rails side, we're using RSpec, and we're setting it up with Guard. Guard runs in the background, so as you're writing code, it's always running the test. If any of your new code breaks one of the tests, it will warn you. We use Factory Girl to make the fixtures, so we're always able to populate the database with different data points to test on. And then we use shoulda for behavior-driven style for writing the test. Do you guys have any questions there? All right. And then for Ember.js, it was really, really hard to actually find a testing framework for it because it is so new. So we ended up settling on is using QUnit. There are alternatives out there. There's Jasmine, there's Kanocha. As Ember gets more and more mature, I'm sure that there will be a lot more tests and testing libraries written for it. We try to follow sort of test coverage guidelines. Testing is meant to be helpful. It's not meant to be intrusive. You shouldn't focus on writing tests and forget about the actual coding part of it. You definitely have to strike the right balance between how much tests you write and what is actually good. So there's a lot of academic research written on test coverage. This is from a Berkeley textbook. They break it up into these categories, and what is suggested is for C0 and C1 coverage. So what does all that mean? S0 coverage is if every method in your program is called. So here's a method, bar. If bar is called, that's S0 coverage. If bar is called both here and here at every place in your program, that's S1 coverage. C0 coverage, every statement is called. So this if statement, if else is one statement. So if every one of these statements your program is called, it's C0 coverage. C1 coverage is every branch of every statement. So this if else statement would be two branches. So if that's called, that's C1 statement. So that's kind of, I guess, popularly recommended as the right coverage, is anywhere from C0 to C1. Anything above that, C1 plus decision coverage, is if in this statement both Y and Z are tested, so every decision branch that you can have is tested, that's C1 plus decision coverage. And C2 coverage is every path possible, but there's a lot of debate on what that actually is. Anywhere beyond C1, maybe you're getting a little bit too fanatical with your tests. It's actually getting intrusive. Again, it's just sort of a guideline. Tests are there to be helpful, not to be intrusive. And we have to refactor our code regularly. So we depend a lot of code smells and what it looks like to be when code starts to get bad. When you're in a startup, because what you're developing is not that well known, you have a business case for it. You're doing a lot of customer interviews, but it is essentially sort of fumbling in the dark. So you're trying to find a market fit for your product. So you develop something, you ship it out there, get customer feedback, you're redeveloping it. And you can imagine that because the process is so iterative, the code gets really, really messy really, really fast. So we have to do a lot of refactoring. There's a lot of kind of automatic tests you can run to see the quality of your code. We just like to use code smell. So there's this kind of SOFA methodology. Code should be short, so it should be almost self-documenting. If you need to write actual comments, actual documentation for your code, maybe it's not good code. It should only have one intent, so there shouldn't be multiple intents in a method. This way it's more modular, there's less coupling. It should have few arguments. If you have a lot of arguments, that's probably a sign that you're not encompassing your data very well. It also makes it really, really hard to test. And then there should be a constant level of abstraction, meaning that each line in the code should be interacting more or less with methods of the same visibility. Should be more or less interacting with variables in a consistent manner. So while we're refactoring, again, it's really, really important to have the tests up and running. So as you refactor, you're confident that you're not breaking any of the code. So basically, that's sort of the way that we're approaching development in our startup. We focused on 3 challenges. We have limited funding, so we have to build very, very cheap. How do you build cheap? You go to open source. Limited coordination, so you have to develop a lot of discipline, a lot of expectations. Also, you have to leverage a lot of productivity tools. And because of limited uncertainty, obviously you have to apply agile lean methods and always set up your tests so that even given uncertainty, you can always be certain that your code is working. Questions? Yeah, we haven't even gotten to that part yet because we're still in the alpha stage. We're going to be releasing the beta sometime in the fall. So yeah, definitely. But I mean, A/B testing, we're focusing more sort of on the marketing pages for the A/B testing rather than the product itself. Yeah.
Are you doing pivoting for your product, or do you have any set of reviewers for your product?
Yeah, we have. So the way we approach the business case is first we looked at kind of the macroeconomic things going on in the Turkish market, and then we started interviewing with people in terms of how they're currently conducting the business, their pain points, the typical kind of things you would do, and then we sort of assembled a couple of beta testers, 10 beta testers. We're talking to them on a regular basis to see as we're developing the product if we're matching all of their requirements. We listed their requirements and then basically sort of prioritize it based on this is them, this is what they definitely need in order just to use the product, and this is sort of nice to have, and that's how we're building the features.
I guess you are using Github for reviewing your code, right? Or do you use any other tool for just reviewing the others' code?
We're just using GitHub. Do you have any suggestions for reviewing?
We are using of Atlassian, but GitHub is also
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of tools. What we try to do is use as little of them as possible because there may be a better tool to track bugs, there may be a better tool to do storyboards, there may be a better tool for this and that. But GitHub almost covers everything we need because we can keep track of bugs there, we can do task assignments there, we can look at milestones there, we can sort of predict our progress there as well. So for our purposes now, it's good enough. All right, so thanks. Hope it was helpful. If you have any questions, my email is right there. Love to get in touch with you guys. Love to talk about kind of your best practices as well for your startup. So thanks, guys.